Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder about those profound moments that seem to shift your entire perspective on life, like a deeply moving meditation session or a truly mind-blowing psychedelic experience? What's actually happening in our minds during those self-transcendent moments? Today we're diving into a fascinating paper that explores just that. It's all about the difference between two ways we experience ourselves, the reflective self and the experiential self, and how they play out during these powerful self-transcendent experiences. Think of it like this: we all have a sense of self, right? But sometimes that sense of self seems to shrink and merge with something bigger, and other times it's very much present and aware. This research dives deep into that paradox. So the core idea here comes from William James, that brilliant psychologist and philosopher who talked about the self as either an object of our experience or the subject experiencing it. This paper builds on that by using the terms reflective self and experiential self. The reflective self is like your inner narrator. It's the part of you that tells your life story, keeps track of your memories, and plans your future. It's very much about who you are and your personal narrative. It's also tied to brain regions that help us think about ourselves and our past and future. On the other hand, the experiential self is more in the moment. It's about sensing, feeling, and how you perceive the world without necessarily analyzing it or creating a story about it. It's a more immediate, raw experience. This is linked to brain networks that help us pay attention to what's happening right now and what feels important or salient. This is the part that's about just being. Now, when it comes to self-transcendent experiences, these are those moments where you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself and your usual sense of self seems to fade. The researchers suggest this happens when our reflective self kind of steps back and our experiential self takes center stage. So the reflective self-state decreases and the experiential self-state increases, leading to a feeling of immersion. It's like the busy narrator quiets down and suddenly you're fully absorbed in the experience. This involves a few key steps. First, there is often an increase in bodily consciousness awareness of your physical sensations. Then there is a reduction in that constant stream of reflective thought narratives about yourself, your worries, your plans. This allows for a more immersive state. And finally, you might even experience a loss of clear bodily boundaries, a feeling of being less contained. This is often called ego dissolution in the context of psychedelic experiences. But even when the self feels like it's dissolving, there is still a sense of being present, a meta, awareness, a feeling of experiencing, not just being gone. But here is a crucial point: just having your boundaries dissolve isn't the whole story. Think about conditions like depersonalization, where people feel detached and disconnected. Self-transcendent experiences are different because they're not just about detachment, they're about increased connection. So as the sense of being a separate little self fades, we become more open to feeling connected to others, to nature, to everything really. It's like when you're so immersed in nature that you feel like you are the trees or the sky. This feeling of connection is key. These shifts from the reflective to the experiential self can happen in different ways. It can be through dedicated practices like meditation or prayer chanting or repetitive movement. It can also be induced by substances like psychedelics, or sometimes just happen spontaneously, during moments of awe. And interestingly, people vary in how easily they can make this switch and how well they can stay in that experiential state. Things like trait absorption, a tendency to get deeply immersed in things, can play a big role. So how do scientists actually measure these things? Well, this paper argues for a building blocks approach. Instead of trying to capture one big mystical experience, they focus on measuring these distinct components, like the reduction of the reflective self and the increase in the experiential self and the feelings of connectedness. They reviewed existing scales and found that many try to measure these pieces. For example, the ego dissolution inventory specifically targets that reduction of the reflective self. Other scales look at feelings of connectedness or experiences of vastness, which point to that expanded experiential self. They even presented a table with examples of items from different scales. For instance, an item like "I lost all sense of ego" would measure the reflective self-reduction, while an item like "I felt a sense of communion with all living things" would measure that connectedness component of the experiential self. They also discuss scales that measure things like bodily consciousness and meta-awareness, which are also important pieces of the puzzle. They also highlighted that some research teams are developing completely new scales to capture these dual self-experiences more precisely. This shows how active and important this area of research is becoming. Beyond just measuring these two selves, researchers are also looking at self-boundaries themselves. Some studies use visual scales where people depict how defined or fuzzy they feel their boundaries are. They found that people with less rigid self-boundaries are often more open to altered states of consciousness and self-transcendent experiences. Now for my take on this research. I think the dual self framework is a really smart way to understand these complex self-transcendent experiences. It takes what can feel like a single vague moment and breaks it down into understandable psychological processes. It explains that common paradox of feeling smaller yet larger perfectly. You feel smaller because your reflective self, your ego, is receding, but you feel larger because your experiential self is expanding to connect with something bigger. And the connection to psychedelics is particularly exciting. Psychedelics seem to act like a shortcut or a powerful catalyst for shifting from the reflective to the experiential self. By studying how they do this in controlled settings, scientists can gain a deeper understanding of the underlying brain mechanisms. This offers a window into how these profound shifts happen without necessarily needing years of meditation practice. The paper also touches on how these experiences can shape our beliefs. It suggests that strong emotional experiences, especially those that feel profoundly real, can deeply influence what we believe. It's like when an experience is so powerful and so connecting it can fundamentally alter our worldview and our sense of purpose. Ultimately, this research offers a practical way to study self-transcendence. By focusing on these building blocks, the dual self framework helps us move from broad categories to specific measurable components. It allows us to compare experiences across different traditions and practices like meditation, psychedelics, and moments of awe. It's a step towards a more unified scientific understanding of some of the most profound moments humans can experience. So next time you find yourself lost in a beautiful sunset or deeply moved by music, remember that it's likely a dance between your reflective and your experiential self, and that dance can lead to some truly transformative moments. If you found this exploration of the self and self-transcendence interesting, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts and experiences, and be sure to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns. Well, see you next time.